Good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Brocker, and I'd like to also introduce Barbara Boyer, who is our executive director. And we are AgeWise Colorado. So I'm going to start with just a few slides explaining who we are, and I'll do a very brief introduction to our two panelists today, and then we'll get rolling. This is our 33rd webinar since we launched years ago. And this one topic is, are your financial decision-making skills exactly where you want them? You need a little help with tax and financial planning. And so you're going to be learning about an NIH-funded research project into financial decisions and cognitive health that's underway at the University of Denver. And we'll also be talking about tax and financial planning. Our panelists today, Dr. Eric Chess, who has a background as a physician and lawyer, and currently serves as clinical professor at the University of Denver with a focus on prevention, well-being, and financial decision-making. And Megan Leip, who is the founder of Conscious Impact Financial Planning, which is a financial wellness and socially responsible investment firm. We are working to become the premier nonprofit information embedded service provider hub for aging Coloradans. Why are we doing this? Well, because our population is getting older fast here in the state of Colorado, and frankly across the country and even around the world. So last year, for the first time, our 60 and over population crossed the under 18 population. So that happened right here. And then our 60 plus population crossed the 45 to 59 line a few years ago. But they're both moving, both of those are moving in the same direction, and that is up. We are the second fastest aging state in the country because of all these dark purple counties here, where the 65 plus population increased by 60% or more during the last census. People often ask who's number one. Well, it's Alaska. But it's percentages, not numbers. So who are we targeting with the work that we're doing? And that's basically about 3 million people. So we have the sandwich generation here, which is, just call it 40 to 65. It's started to trend a little younger though. And then the over 60, 65 population. We serve aging Coloradans, caregivers of aging Coloradans and their adult children, employers who have people working in that sandwich generation. Of course, all of our vetted service providers and all organizations committed to healthy aging Coloradans. This is just a shot from our website that shows the different categories of services that we have. And clicking on any of these will produce a drop down of subcategories that make it easy to find. We get a lot of compliments on our website. It's easy to use, it's clean. We don't take any credit for that. We had a couple of people that put that together for us, and they did a great job and continue to. Our educational webinars, we have the next one is coming up on June 20th. We're going to be talking about food as medicine and addressing some nutrition issues. And then, as it says, no webinars in July, and we'll be coming out with our schedule for August through November, sometime in the next few weeks. And I'd like to first introduce Dr. Chess. So, as I mentioned earlier, he has a background as a physician and lawyer and is clinical professor at the University of Denver with a focus on prevention, well-being, and financial decision-making. He founded and continues to direct the Paul Freeman Financial Security Program at the university's Noble Institute for Healthy Aging. Additionally, Dr. Chess serves as an adjunct professor for both the Daniels College of Business and the Sturm College of Law at the University of Denver. So, Eric, tell us what you do and why you do it, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. First, I'd say, thanks to you, thanks to Barbara and to Megan It's great to be on. I do wish that commercial for AgeWise was a little bit longer, because I think it's such an amazing organization, and so there's so much good that it's doing and will be doing, and so I'm proud to be part of this today and to support AgeWise. I'm going to share my screen as we get into it, and let's just make sure this works. So I'm going to start by discussing the connection between health and finances, and which is really how I got into it. And as Bob said, prior to getting to the university, I was in practice as an internal medicine physician, and one of the things that I started to spend more and more focus on was comprehensive well-being of my patients. And when you start to do that, you start to realize all the different connections behind the symptoms, the real symptoms that bring people to the office or to the emergency room. And so that connection between health and finances actually becomes very interesting, and then led to an entire research, education, outreach program that I'm involved in right now. So first is the connection between mental health and physical health. And this is something that's been very obvious and apparent and confirmed, over many years, that the emotional and mental health symptoms cause real physical health symptoms and disease, chronic disease. So that connection's well established. And then when you think about, okay, well, mental health, emotional health, well, what are the causes? And the American Psychological Association does a study every year on what stresses Americans out the most. And three things are always jockeying for top position. And one of them, as you can imagine, would be your own health or the health of a family member. And, so when we're going through health events, obviously that's very stressful, but always in the top three is financial health and finances and financial well-being. And so, it's across the spectrum. It's not just for people who don't have so much money. It's people who have plenty of money. The amount of stress and anxiety that finances cause is always up there. If you're interested, the third that's always generally jockeying for top three positions is this state of the nation politically, and how much we're all fighting with each other. So those top three, but we're going to focus on the finances part. So another connection, financial fraud and exploitation can lead to declines in mental health and emotional health. And so that makes some intuitive sense, that if you've been defrauded or exploited, that's going to cause you to cause anxiety, cause stress. Interestingly, poor emotional or mental health can also lead to being defrauded and exploited. And so it kind of goes both ways. And then underappreciated in all this is the connection between cognitive health and financial decision-making. And that's where we're going to jump in a little bit more. So before doing that, let's go back to some statistics on cognitive impairment and dementia. And so by age 70, an eighth of the population has some form of cognitive impairment or dementia. And this is looping them both together, bring them together. And these numbers, it's not important to focus on the specific number. It's generally speaking, because actually it's very difficult to get at this data. And so you'll see in different sites, the numbers will vary, but around an eighth of the population. By age 75, that percentage doubles to around 25% of the population. And by age 80, around 50% of the population has some form of cognitive impairment or dementia. So staggering numbers there. Now, Bob was getting into some of the demographics of aging, and so I won't spend much time on it, but yes, we are an aging population. And so if you look at the number of Americans 65 and older, you can see from 2013, 2030, 2060, what the projections are going forward. So when you think about that last slide of how significant cognitive impairment and dementia is in an aging population, and the number of Americans that are going to, be in this population, we have challenges on our hands. And then dementia is, there's a lot involved in dementia, but the annual cost of dementia is underappreciated. Around 345 billion in 1 year is spent on dementia. And then the value of unpaid caregiving that goes along with dementia is an additional $339 billion. And so the caregiving side, and Bob mentioned that sandwich generation that often are the caregivers, the unpaid caregivers. It's a very significant component, and it gets into their own health and well-being as well. And then if you think about per person costs, let me go back to that if I can. And so we don't often realize this, but if you don't have dementia, we're spending around $15,000 a year for people who are 65 and older on total health care and long-term care from all sources. But for people who do have dementia, that number, it's around triple. And because dementia, a lot of times you have all the other chronic diseases as well, and you have the additional costs of dementia care, which can be staggering. So there's a financial cost to the entire country and world on this issue. Now, what does any of this have to do with financial decision making? Well, it turns out that the earliest markers for decline in cognitive function are often found in impaired financial decision making. And that can be well before you notice any classic symptoms like memory loss. This can be in all different realms. And so this has been studied over the last 20 years now, confirmed over time. So it can be in bank statements, it can be in kind of medical deductibles, just basic transactions like calculating tips or making change, detecting fraud risk, prioritizing bill repayment, investment decisions, savings decisions. And so across a lot of different financial domains, we're seeing this as the first indicator of any potential cognitive impairment. And why is this? Financial decision-making encompasses a wide array of cognitive tasks that need simultaneous attention. And that can be risk assessment, judgment, relationships, emotions. There's a lot going on. And so if you were thinking about, from a medical standpoint, if we did a functional MRI of someone while they were making a financial decision, it would light up in all sorts of different areas in your brain at the same time, because there's so much going on in even relatively common financial decisions. So further conceptual framework to explain this intersection between finances and cognitive health is that we all have two types of intelligence, generally speaking. First, crystallized intelligence. As we age, we accrue knowledge, wisdom, we accrue experience. Crystallized intelligence, if you're thinking about your brain like a computer, is our hard drive, and we're blessed with almost unlimited hard drives. And so you can see this form of intelligence just keeps on rising, and you can see it plateauing when we hit our 70s, but there's some good information to suggest actually it doesn't even have to plateau. We can keep on building that knowledge, wisdom, and experience over the course of our lifetime, depending on what we do and how we live our lives. So that's kind of the good news on intelligence. The other side of intelligence is fluid intelligence. And so if you're thinking about your brain like a computer, fluid intelligence is our processing speed. So the information's in there, but how quickly do we have access to it? How quickly can we manipulate that information? So fluid intelligence, as you can see in this graph, peaks really early on in our 20s. Now, the research suggests that our peak financial age occurs in the early 50s, in the seminal study at age 53. And this is when we have substantial crystallized intelligence, and our fluid intelligence hasn't dropped off too much. And this is well before, and this is a staggering number for a lot of people, because it's well before almost anyone notices any signs or symptoms of any cognitive impairment or loss. And in fact, even in medical offices and doctors' offices, we're not capturing this early on because we're not taking advantage of all of this research on the financial side that actually some of the very subtle markers are happening much earlier. Another set of studies looked at financial acuity. How much knowledge do we have? And real knowledge versus perceived. How much do we think we have? And when they looked first at objective financial acuity, these set of studies mimicked the previous slide, which is basically peaking in our early 50s in terms of how much objective financial knowledge that we have. But the interesting thing about this set of studies was they also asked the question, how confident are you in your financial decisions? And interestingly, the confidence was remaining high even as objective financial knowledge and acuity was going down. And so you can see on the right-hand side of this graph, those lines are becoming farther and farther apart. And this is information that was shocking to a lot. And also this is exactly the information that people who commit fraud and exploitation are feeding off of, exactly that gap in our confidence versus our actual objective financial acuity. And that gets into exploitation and fraud, financial exploitation and fraud. And so for fraud and abuse, around $3 billion a year. And again, this is very difficult to get at. There are a lot of folks who think that this is extremely an underestimate of the total amount. When you think about exploitation, which goes beyond just fraudulent financial behavior, but exploitation in a financial sense, that skyrockets up to $36 billion a year. And that also it's very difficult to get at this information. And most think that that's a gross underestimate of how much we're losing. And that's for people who are 60 and older. So why are older adults at risk? Well, there are a number of reasons. So one is older adults generally have accumulated assets over time, and so they have more money. So people who are committing fraud and exploitation would love to go after the deep pockets. Older adults are more likely to experience social isolation. Older adults are more likely to have major changes in health status that make them more vulnerable. And older adults receiving assistance from a caregiver is an independent risk factor for being taken advantage of, unfortunately. And then there's an array of individual behaviors associated with vulnerability. And finally, that connection between cognitive decline and impaired financial decision making is one that's underappreciated and very significant in terms of why older adults are at risk. Now, I do like to point out that we're all at risk. I spend a lot of time at the Noble Institute for Healthy Aging and in my program, the Paul Freeman Financial Security Program, on older adults, and that is our mission. But we do like to point out that this isn't just an issue and a challenge for older adults. We are all at risk. In fact, younger adults are actually more likely to get taken advantage of and more vulnerable to scams than older adults. It's just for much less money per instance. And so the amount of loss is much less than for older adults. But in terms of the number of times, they're actually getting scammed more often. And there's a number of reasons for this. And so younger adults are more impulsive and have more of an optimism bias, and their crystallized intelligence. When I speak in front of older adults, I tell them, yeah, well, the older adults have all the wisdom, knowledge, and experience. The younger adults, none of this, and their crystallized intelligence is low. And so that actually puts them at risk in a different way. So age-related differences are very important in this field. So then if you think about the perpetrators of exploitation and fraud, unfortunately, it can be anyone. So it can be the people who are calling or texting. It can be in the door-to-door sales people. It can be in regular mail. It can be obviously online and internet. Even and of course, not today. You're going to hear from Megan and fantastic. On the financial side, and someone who's a fiduciary and is responsible and providing great care. But some of the people are putting themselves out there as financial planners or investment advisors, and they're not who they say they are. And so even financial advisors sometimes can be perpetrators. And of course, the worst in all of this is actual caregivers, friends, and family members. And that the people who are closest to us are often actually the most likely to take advantage of us. So if you think about why, well, there was a sociologist named Donald Cressy in the mid 1900s who came up with the fraud triangle, and why people commit fraud. And basically it had three different components, as you can see on this triangle: opportunity, rationalization, and pressure. And so if you think about pressure, it's like that motivation. Why? Is it financial pressure? Is it, a lot of times if someone is in a really bad financial situation themselves, then they are more likely to have that need. Addiction is unfortunately a big cause of people then defrauding and exploiting others because of that pressure that they are feeling. Opportunity is there easy access, and this gets into the caregivers and the friends and the family who might have a lot more easy access to funds. And so if it's sitting right there, and there's a perceived low risk of consequences because that opportunity is so easy. And then finally, rationalization. People have a really good way of rationalizing their own behavior. They'll say other people steal, it's okay, it's only a loan, I'll pay it back, and then it doesn't happen. Or I deserve this is why I'm allowed to take this money. And so fraud can be thought of this way. What's important going forward in terms of why this triangle is important is actually leads to solutions, because when you look at the triangle, there are some areas that we can do a lot about, and there are some areas that we can't do as much about. And so kind of getting at the most impactful measures and solutions. And this is where we work with government agencies, institutions, and financial institutions as well, to try to get at better solutions along these lines. I do also always like to point out that fraud and exploitation is very important, and it's obviously a major problem, but a lot of people are losing a lot of money having nothing to do with any fraud or any exploitation. And hopefully that is most people, but still losing all this money to suboptimal financial decisions that are unrelated to you're not being defrauded or exploited, but you're just not making the best decisions. And so if this is because of any of those factors discussed before, we'd want to hold on to our money as much as possible. And Megan's going to help us get into that a little later. So this can be in any area, right? Or housing. Are we optimizing housing, healthcare, Social Security, retirement accounts, insurance, annuities, spending, savings, investments of all kinds? We want to optimize all of this, all of our financial decision making. So a consensus solution has been education. We should all be, have more education around our finances. Unfortunately, it's not working very well. There have been a lot of studies about the education, and although a lot of it is very good and necessary, it's not working as well as we would want. And why is that? Well, a couple reasons. One, we've learned that objective financial knowledge has only modest correlation with financial behavior. And essentially what that means is we can pump you with facts about compound interest or things to do. It's not actually changing your behavior going forward. And so even if we have that, and that's where people who even know a lot can get into trouble with poor financial decision-making or fraud and exploitation. And then these educational interventions are then having very little effect over time. And so while it's important and we're doing a lot, we need to recognize that actually it's maybe tip of the iceberg, and we have to look at how we're doing this and why. And so why is financial education relatively unsuccessful or not as successful as it should be? There are a bunch of reasons. Gotten into this a little bit. Financial decision making is complex, right? There's, of course, a component of mathematical processing, but there's risk assessment, there's judgment, there's relationships, there's emotions, age-related differences in learning, and predictably irrational decision making. And this is prospect theory. And so prospect theory represented a major shift in economic theory, resulting in a Nobel Prize in economics. And interestingly, the winners weren't economists, they were psychologists. And that was Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky developed prospect theory. And essentially that we make our financial decisions not necessarily just optimizing what's best for our bottom line in our wallet. So has anyone, for instance, made a financial decision made based on fear or love or anger or pride or compassion, spite, or showing off, boasting. There's all sorts of different reasons that we make financial decisions that might not be best in our best financial interest. So what's missing in financial education? This is where my group gets very involved in this, and have developed education, a different look at education for older adults and through the life course. But behavioral economics, it's underrepresented in a lot of the education models. Behavioral psychology, emotional intelligence, neuroscience, and neuroeconomics are almost always not there at all, and yet it's a very important part. And then age-appropriate methods. We can't teach all adults on a similar program. It just doesn't, our brains don't work the same. And then we have to do a better job of actual good measurement and validation of the programming that we're setting out there. Otherwise, we're just patting ourselves on the back and saying we've done some nice things and with some true information, but it's not actually moving the needle. So another solution is about screening and prevention. So if we have this information that financial decision making is at kind of at the cusp of cognitive impairment, then we should be trying to capture that like we do in other realms. With heart disease, we check cholesterol early on and even in kids, and we get way ahead of heart disease and sometimes prevent it entirely. Same thing with diabetes. We check blood sugars in kids and young adults, and we can get way out in front by 30, 40, 50 years sometimes of major diseases and even cancer. We have a lot of different screenings where we're diagnosing the future, essentially, with our screening tests and preventing a lot. What are we doing with dementia? For anyone who goes to their doctor, and that used to be me, for your regular yearly visit, it's not part of any standard screening to do any cognitive testing as part of a well visit. So the only time it comes up in general, except for physicians who are more proactive, and that's relatively few, you're not getting any of that. So it only comes up when you bring it up. And so if you bring it up as a symptom or a worry for yourself or a family member, then the system gets activated. But for a lot of folks, it's not until way later when we're experiencing those symptoms like profound memory loss that we might be 10 or 20 years behind the curve. And that's a shame. So it's another thing that we're working on. So we are named, so we initially were the Financial Security Program and Cognitive Health Program in that connection. And when we started in 2016, and that was, I started this program along with Paul Freeman. And Paul was a great man. And unfortunately, he died a few years back. And so in honor of Paul and all the work that he did and to honor his life and his legacy, we've renamed the program the Paul Freeman Financial Security Program, just in case you're wondering. And so in his legacy and going forward, and for all we have folks on our team who are from all different disciplines around campus, because as discussed before, this is not just a business and a finances issue. This is about psychology. It's about social work. It's about technology and solutions that are outside of the box. And so we have professors and grad students on campus who work with us from all different disciplines and even the legal side and the law school as well. We're up to a lot. And so briefly getting into it, the early screening and an early screening assessment for impaired financial decision-making. For me, it's at the core of bringing kind of the health and my physician background. If we can utilize this information, for right now, it's just buried in these beautiful research papers and been confirmed over time, but it's not actually actionable. And if we could get this to be something that's more out there in public and actual early screening assessment so we can get out in front of these things, that's one of the things that we're up to. We're also doing early assessment for financial vulnerability. So these behaviors that we're talking about and why people are making financial decisions, well, if we could have, we're working on a vulnerability assessment. And so then would point people in the right directions to prevent financial fraud, financial exploitation, and just plain old suboptimal financial decision-making. On this one, we had a recent symposium with the Consumer Financial Protective Bureau, which is the federal government's arm that deals with fraud and exploitation and guidelines for financial institutions. And so we hosted along with them at the University of Denver, but brought in the governor's office, the attorney general's office in Colorado, the Denver DA's office, a number of financial institutions, the Denver Police Department, and Adult Protective Services, both nationally and Colorado, for a symposium of thought leaders on this issue. And there's now an ongoing new collaboration that we're leading from this program with law enforcement, government, Adult Protective Services, the financial institutions, and several others. So that's very exciting new work. We also get into our group, as I mentioned, is broad-based, and we all have this comprehensive well-being. The financial side is a core of what we do. But since we have all these broad interests and broad expertise, we do work in aging and well-being in a number of different areas too. We work with in aging and well-being and technology with a company called Routinify, a fantastic company that does work to help older adults in how they age. We have some NIH-funded collaboration with a financial industry partner in New York called Silverbills, and some great work with bill paying and caregivers and getting to that caregiver and that sandwich generation side. We work with Wish of a Lifetime. So we have funded work with a number of different outside institutions just to, on older adult initiatives. We also get into policy, we get into financial education, and we have developed the program for older adults, but we have also put together a proposal for financial education through the lifespan, including that sandwich generation and young adults, because all of this is interconnected. So there's a lot that we do. I could go on this, but I'm really happy to be partnering with Megan, because I'm excited to hear from her standpoint, doing really some fantastic work on the front line of this issue in helping people with their finances. And so with that, I'll say thank you. I'm so appreciative to be here, and again, appreciative of the work that that Bob is doing and AgeWise is doing in such a fantastic way in so many different areas to help older adults. And so this shared mission that we have is very meaningful to me. And so I'm very appreciative, and thank you. And I'll stop sharing now.
Okay, thanks, Eric. That was great. I very much appreciated that. I've seen a little bit of it in the past, but you've done a lot since then. So moving right along. I had a couple of quick questions before we go to Megan, and one has to do with this idea of the fluid and versus the crystallized intelligence. And so how did the people who came up with this graph, how did they do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's generally speaking, it's psychologists coming up with a framework of how we think and what that means. And then looking into, well, what are the components of fluid intelligence? What are the components of crystallized intelligence? So if you think about it, it will make some intuitive sense that, well, as we age, we know more, right? And we have more life experience and we have more knowledge built in there. And so there are ways to measure that and test it kind of over time. And that's where you saw at the end of the spectrum for older adults that it looked like we were not learning and taking on as much. And I mentioned that actually that doesn't have to be the case, because it used to be that older adults would retire and not do so much with their lives. And now more and more people are continuing to, whether it's work or volunteer or remain a lot more active physically and mentally, that they're continuing to grow that kind of crystallized intelligence. The processing speed is, yeah, how quickly are we doing things and how quickly can we manipulate that information? So they came up, there's ways to test that as well. I will say, not part of this talk, but there's a group of people more recently in the last 10 years saying actually emotional intelligence actually needs to be part of that and put into that framework. And I'm in agreement on that. And that's where we do bring in emotional intelligence in terms of the education that we do. So these are, but they're overall frameworks, Bob. And so it's not as hard a science as some of the other things, but very measurable in terms of that processing speed versus just straight up knowledge and wisdom.
Okay, thank you. And one other quick thing, and that is, do you have any recommendations for people who are older and in that less fluid decision making to help them do better? I mean, I'll just give you one example from my own life, and that is, I find myself writing myself a lot more notes than I did 10 years ago, for example. And that helps me a lot to, because otherwise I might forget stuff. So writing it down, just the act of writing it down helps you remember, but then having a place, if you can find it on your desk later. So are there other things that you can suggest?
Yeah, part of the early identification, if we started to notice something or in a family member, part of why it's important is because there's a lot we can do just from a lifestyle standpoint, like you're bringing up, some tricks to help you. When we start to get into brain health, and I have a whole different talk that I do around the university and around Colorado on aging and well-being and what we should be doing, and that would require, I would take all of Megan's time if we went entirely into that. But essentially, lifestyle lifestyle advancements that we can make to help protect ourselves are some of the things that are most basic. And what I try to get into is, well, how can we actually do behavior change? But some of those basics are nutrition and exercise and sleep and social engagement and active brain. And when active brain's an important, one, all these are extremely important, but underappreciated on the active brain is sometimes we get caught just doing the same thing over and over, but challenging our brains to do more. Basically exercising your brain. We can get caught in doing similar things over and over. We think we're doing a good job because we just do crossword puzzles and that's the only thing that we do, or we have one brain game that we do, and then you get good at that one game, but actually challenging in a way that makes us maybe feel even uncomfortable for your brain to exercise it. And so the sleep, nutrition, physical activity, mental activity, social side, engagement. So these are some of the tenets, but there's a lot of detailed information that goes into that maybe on a future webinar.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Eric. Okay. Megan, tell us more about you. First, I want to read a little bio that I have here from Megan. So let me do that. And there you go. So Megan is the founder of Conscious Impact Financial Planning, which is a financial wellness and socially responsible investment firm. She's spent the last 14 years conducting financial life planning, counseling, and education, and is dedicated to empowering others to transform their finances into personal advocacy. She received a Bachelor of Science in Accounting from Franklin University and a Master of Science in Family Financial Planning from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. When Megan is not working, she volunteers. Well, it sounds like she works an awful lot, though. But when Megan is not working, she volunteers for the financial advocacy movement, which provides free financial counseling, financial planning, and tax preparation to those who need it most. Her remaining personal time is dedicated to her spouse, rescue dog, and their many travels around the world. So, Megan, tell us more about you and why you do what you do.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I'll take it away. Dr. Chess did a wonderful job of explaining what the problem is, but the bigger issues, and some of the broader terms or broader ways that we can address it. But I really want to get into the more personal side, like personal financial planning. What does that mean to me as a person who either is an older individual or perhaps is ready to take care of an older individual? And I will say that Bob's advice about writing things down, that's part of the solution that I want to propose. Because the thing about conscious planning is that it must be a written plan and it has to be known by two people. Because the thing that ends up happening, and actually, let me go ahead and I'm going to screen share before I forget. So I'm going to screen share the AgeWise page, so that a lot of things I'm talking about, if you want to go back and reference, you can just go back to AgeWise Colorado to my page, and you can get the information here. So yeah, so the thing is, with conscious tax and conscious financial planning, you're really trying to make it so that you aren't vulnerable, because there is one other person who is aware of your plans. There is someone who could be who could step in to probably reduce the opportunity of fraud if there is more than one person who knows what is supposed to be happening, and someone who is like accountability buddy, someone you check in with just to see, you know, where the plan is going. Those are the two things that we have found to be not even just the best way to continue your financial wellness, but also a way to prevent other things like unintended consequences, like being taken advantage of by a family member, or perhaps if there is cognitive decline, these kinds of practices will be the first thing to identify them, because the plan will start not going to plan. But the other thing about financial planning is a lot of people just don't know what to plan for, right? You know, I don't know what I don't know. And the financial industry itself is designed to be overwhelming. So we saw some of the statistics where, you know, you saw that, you know, even though you felt just as confident in your finances, what your true knowledge of the industry is might have declined. And that's because it takes about 100 hours every year to keep on top of everything that's going on in the financial industry, with all the different things that new products that are being made, with the new laws that are being implemented, the tax stuff. I mean, don't even get me started. That's a whole other category. How on earth could you possibly want to keep on top of that? And so keeping a plan in place is the best way to make sure you don't stray from your intentions. And what kind of plans are these? So we have found that there's really 6 major categories for financial planning. And we've kind of named them in a way that people better understand. But in the financial planning industry, we would call it cash flow planning, risk planning, savings and investing, retirement planning, tax planning, and estate planning, right? Those are the words that you kind of hear in the financial industry. But what do those plans really mean, right? So for cash planning, a lot of people associate that with budgets. Do you have a budget? Do you have a budget that you have intended to change over time, especially when you're starting to get into some interesting healthcare costs, right? The difference between $15,000 a year in healthcare and $44,000 in healthcare is a tremendous difference. And if there's not a plan in place for those kinds of expenses, or the possibility of those kinds of expenses, you might be woefully unprepared when those things come into place, right? And weakening risk, right? That's risk planning. So that can be stuff like insurance, whether it's healthcare insurance, long-term care insurance. Some people choose to self-insure, which is an interesting thing, that if you have the capability to do so, is amazing. But the thing is, everybody has a plan, and sometimes people's plan is nothing, right? And if you plan for nothing, why would you be surprised if nothing is what you receive? And so if you're not prepared for these sorts of things, or these sorts of things you don't necessarily want to think about, you may destroy your entire financial plan, because every part of this is connected, right? And so gathering and growing resources, saving and investing. A lot of times when you talk to financial planners, this is what they're going to be talking about, right? They're going to talk about your investments, your rate of return, but they're not going to talk about, are you going to have enough money to last yourself through retirement? Are you doing anything that's maybe against your own personal values? These are things you also have to have a plan for. Are you being intentional with where you're putting your money, when you are going to need it, and what obstacles might come in between here and there? Conserving resources. So that's effective tax planning. That can be the trickiest. Like I said, like even I have a hard time keeping ahead of that. But taxes get really tricky, especially when you get to retirement, because you have tax advantaged accounts, you have Roth accounts, you have sheltered accounts where now you have to start taking something called a required minimum distribution. And if you miss that, they charge you 50% of what you were supposed to take. A 50% tax is astronomical. And all it takes is a little bit of planning and preparation to make sure you don't do that. But if you think that the only one individual can take all of that on and they're going to ultimately always be there to make those decisions, you're setting yourself up for a bit of a dominoes game where the entire plan again can fall apart when only one person understands that plan. And so with going in even in retirement, making sure that you withdraw at a rate that's not going to deplete before you reach the end, right? You may be planning on perhaps, taking care of your kids at a certain age, but financially, when you get to that age, they may not be able to help you there. So being able to make sure that you have a secondary plan of self-sufficiency in retirement planning and waiving all the ups and downs of the markets are something you need to have a plan for as well. And then for legacy planning, a lot of people, they don't want people to grieve for them after they pass, right? And of course, that's ideal. But the thing is, if your assumption is that your people won't grieve for you, and you don't give them the opportunity to have that time by giving them either the funds they'll need to survive during their grief period, or perhaps to hiring the help that they're going to need to transition, you're making them have to deal with their grief on top of all the other problems that may have been left after you leave. And so, just having a plan in place for who is going to file the paperwork for probate, or who is going to who's going to do the executioner, or who's going to be the executioner of the trust, who's going to take over the plan after you're gone. Conscious planning takes a lot more than just what a lot of financial professionals think is a financial plan. This is your life, this is your legacy, and even just educating the next generation to how to preserve your legacy and the intention you gave with those assets. I come from a family that we would have been very wealthy if one generation didn't just waste it all, right? Because they weren't educated, they didn't understand the intention of the person who had built all that wealth. And, they just, in one generation, all of that had been built up over time was completely lost. And so having these intentional financial plans is important, even if it's just with your spouse. It could be someone at church, but someone else to talk about these plans with. Because honestly, talking with someone you know and someone you trust, it can be a financial professional, but these plans can also be exciting. They don't have to be terrible, I'm going to die, everything goes wrong kind of plans. Sometimes it's like, you know what? I really would love my legacy to be this. Let me daydream these plans. Let me figure out how I can remove any obstacles that might come between me and the things I want my life to mean. Because ultimately, yes, these are dollars and cents. But a dollar bill, like if you had a dollar bill in your hand, it stands for something else. It has no real meaning other than what we give it meaning to. In the apocalypse, it will be a wonderful cotton blend toilet paper. That's how much it actually means in real life without the promises and the meaning that we assign to it. So, there's a lot of different plans you can have in your own, personal life, depending on your situation. But there's all of these other layers that you're going to want to plan for. And getting your family involved is usually the most effective way to make sure that the plan stays the plan and it's not undermined by fraud or ill intent, or sometimes just, how do I put it? Impaired financial decision making. I love that. It's a kind way of putting it. And the thing is, we do this to ourselves all the time, right? Our budget is one of the best examples of us having impaired decision-making, where we think we spend one thing, but we're spending a different one, right? Our impairment is in the acknowledgement of the reality of the spending. So it's prevalent everywhere, and there should be no shame for this. Like, we all do it because we're people, and money is something that we have assigned meaning to. And ultimately, the meaning is what we really want out of these financial plans. So I do volunteer a lot for an organization called the Financial Advocacy Movement. And there we're trying to just start these conversations, start these groups, find accountability buddies, and just getting people to talk about it. Because what I see in my work is that the biggest obstacle to any of this, anything that we've talked about today, is this apprehension to talk about money, the shame we might feel wrapped up with it, and then all this these feelings that bombard us on top of all of those things. And so if there's anything that I would hope you get out of today's presentation, is that we just have to start talking about these things, just like you're doing now. You're here listening to more information, and maybe you're going to learn something today, and you're going to talk about it with anybody. It doesn't matter who, but by you talking about it, you're going to start promoting this culture where we're collectively going to start getting better and create a culture where we're going to have less opportunity to take advantage, because we're not going to be hiding our finances, or keeping our financial decisions a secret, right? They're going to be public, and then therefore, our ability to be taken advantage of is going to lower. So I know I don't have as a formal presentation as Dr. Chess did, but I'm always happy to have conversations, and I invite people to talk to me or to reach out to the organization that I work with. Because yes, these conversations are amazing, and you're part of it. We need you. So I encourage everyone to continue and join us.
Okay, Megan, thank you. I had just a quick question, and that you mentioned, people don't like to talk about money. Why do you think that is?
Well, I can't speak to everybody, but a lot of people have their self-worth wrapped up in their money, and it can be very scary to allow yourself to be vulnerable in front of people when your self-worth is involved, right? Because maybe people might assume other things. I will say that I won't blame social media, but perhaps there is this notion in general in culture that people who are rich or people who have things together have done so because they're good people with good spirits or good religions or whatever it is. It's wrapped up in their goodness and their self-worth and that sort of thing. And so because people think that, sometimes other people think that if you are not rich or you don't have your stuff together, that means you're a bad person. You have to be the opposite, right? And even though it's not said out loud, it's kind of inferred that once you have everything, once you're a good person, things are going to work out. And so I want to say that that's probably the one I see the most, where it's like, I don't want to feel like a bad person. So I don't want to talk about it. And the other part is sometimes it's just so overwhelming. You can't even utter the words. You're so frustrated. Sometimes it's like you want to angry cry. And how could you possibly talk about it when you don't feel rational enough to be able to fix it? So it's emotional and it's personal, like everything I've just talked about. So I feel like, it's all about us as people that makes it harder to talk about it.
So the nonprofit that you talked about being involved in, how do people engage with that group, and what would they get out of belonging?
So it's very new. We're trying to figure out what's working best for people. Is this the thing is, no one knows the best way forward. Dr. Chess probably has the closest, most studied way that I've ever seen. But still, like they're starting with solutions, right? There's no white papers yet on what's working. And so right now they're inviting people to just join. And there's like threads, like Reddit kind of threads, and just to start making friends like Facebook and start conversations on these threads. There's also, you can join them, and by joining them, they offer a suite of software, an educational program, and they also have, I want to say there's a third thing, but they're trying to just, get more people to consider themselves members to start these conversations and kind of make a grassroots movement for people who want to start talking about money.
Okay. So could you put the information about that group into the chat, and also your contact info? And Eric, I would ask you to do the same on the contact info piece. So if people have questions later and they want to reach out to you, they can. And at this point too, I would open that up to the audience here. We've had a few people join us a little later, and are there any questions out there that you would like to ask? And you can just speak up and ask your question.
I have a comment / question. I thought it was interesting, the acuity goes down at age 53, if that's the right word. And so should our advisor be younger than 53?
It's a really good question, and we did some work on some of the firms that have a lot of older adults as their the frontline financial planners, and should that be looked at? And so not necessarily, when we talk about this stuff, these are the kind of the broad numbers. What's not true is that means that any individual person is not necessarily at their best, and some people can be managing their finances beautifully into their 80s and 90s, and we've seen that too, for all different reasons. However, it's something that we bring up with the financial institutions that they need to be aware of. And so this is where, for me, it's if it's going undetected, we need to detect it. And so it is incumbent on financial institutions to have programs in place to help and make sure that they're, all the people who are providing financial advice are, in the, doing the best they can. And so, and that would mean being very attentive to this issue. And some of the firms are not. What I will say is when we've had discussions with some of the larger financial industry firms, they're well aware of this issue, and so this is not something that that is news to them. And the idea that of the relationship between cognitive impairment and financial decision making, and that obviously then speaks to their own providers of financial care. So it's a great question, though, and so it was one of the original things years ago when we were getting into this is that potentially you have someone who is an older adult who is having more challenges and difficulties with their financial decision making, and their financial planner is also in the same boat if they didn't realize that. And so that could be a difficult situation. So it's a great question.
So if an advisor recognizes his impairment, like Megan, for example, if she recognizes a client has an impairment, what would Megan recommend? Or I guess that's a question for Megan or whomever's the advisor.
I also wanted to add, so there is a program called AARP Bank Safe. And it is a program offered to all financial professionals, whether you work for a bank or, our firm has gone through it. And so it shows you how to look for the signs of dementia and fraud, especially in the older population, which is why it makes sense that AARP is the one that puts it on. And so we have a like a badge that we put on our website after we've completed the training. So that's what we do to mitigate that situation. We actually go through a training that's put on by AARP. But if you are suspecting that maybe, or you worry that your financial professional may have this issue, you might just ask them if they'll go through the training. It's a free training, and see if they'll get certified. And that's kind of a nice way of asking. But I know it's on a lot of our radar because I have more than one state regulator, and they are sharp. And if you're not sharp, they know. So I would say that the other thing, if you're regulated, so if you are registered with the state or registered with the SEC, there are other things in place to make sure that you're not in a position to take advantage of any of your clients. So I would say that as long as they're not I don't want to say fly by night, but if they're not an entity with oversight, those be the other ways that I try to see if they'll take this kind of notion seriously, because it is a very serious thing in our industry.
But if you recognize a client with an impairment, what would you ask a family member get involved, or what would you do? Or just
so there's the entire training. There's 4 different things that they recommend, but usually it's you isolate the individual because you already have a plan with them. So you isolate the individual if you can. And then you usually already, so for us, we are ahead of this. So we already have it in place where if there is something that is going wrong, who is your second in command, or who's the person that we ask for, who is understanding of your finances, who we might go to if you're incapacitated or that sort of thing. And that person is usually the second person that we'll go to inquire if there has been any. We won't give details. Is there anything that we need to have updated is how we'll ask. It's like, have you noticed any behaviors, any financial changes? And if they say no, like, no, everything's going exactly to plan, but my client is saying, hey, can you take out everything in my 401k? Like, there's other flags, other things like waiting. So we'll wait like a 10-day period until we can verify that this is the true wish if the plan is changing. So we'll kind of like, because we have to listen to the client legally, we have to, but we can do things to like wait to make sure that like if there's a time issue that maybe we can catch it if we give it more time. We'll try to go to secondary positions of authority or other trusted contacts. And I want to say there's two other things that are not coming straight to mind. But yeah, it goes through like all the different ways that you can try to legally but basically buy yourself more time. But ultimately, if the client tells you and there's no other indicator that they are having some sort of issue, you have to do what they say. So that's kind of where we're limited. But yeah, take a look at that training. It's really, really good. And it's actually pretty interactive. You have to answer questions through videos, and like you get brought with situations, and you have to like say how you'd respond and stuff. So I really do like that training.
So can you repeat the AARP thing?
So it's called AARP Bank Safe Training.
Bank Safe?
Bank Safe, yep. And it's free for any financial institution, or I would probably say any interested party, but I don't know what their rules are.
Okay.
Well, that's good. That would be good to know. Someone like yourself has that training. So thank you for that. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Well, Megan, you have all these initials after your name. So can you tell us what those are?
Yes, so AFC, because alphabetical is the correct way, right? So AFC, Accredited Financial Counselor. So in 2008, I got my certification as a financial counselor as a military spouse. And basically, a financial counselor is different from a financial planner in that it is the human side, and they're not allowed to give financial advice in terms of investing, right? It's very limited that way. Budgeting, coaching, all that stuff is good, but as soon as you recommend investment advice, you go outside the bounds of counseling. And so because I got very frustrated with that situation, after I got my AFC, I went and got my CFP. So that is Certified Financial Planner. And that is the advanced stuff. That is investment advice. That is everything in planning, as high as you can go as far as like financial credentialing, I would say, for financial planning. There are some other ones that are equal, that are different 3-letter acronyms, but I would say that the CFP I chose because I thought it was the best. And then the third one I have is EA, and that is the Enrolled Agent designation. And that is given by the IRS once you've shown that you've reached a certain level of competency. So they're very specific that I am not a representative of the IRS. I'm not working for them, but I have shown that I have all the competency to prepare taxes in their eyes. So that is what an enrolled agent is. And so because I have that competency, I can actually represent people in tax court on behalf of their taxes and things like that. So the funny thing is, though, I have 2 bachelors. I have a master's. I've got 8 different initials after my last name. And all of that, like, all of that just showed me that all of like my problems were personal problems and not education problems. They were behavioral problems after all, because I know everything, but I mess up just as much as everybody else. Because it's an emotional, personal thing that finances are. And you can study for 10+ years like I did, and it won't make a difference if you're not willing to take that deep look inside and figure out why you're really doing things. And it's not because the market or most of the things we tell ourselves. I'll put it that way.
Well, we tell ourselves a lot of things to substantiate what we want to do. Yes. Are there any other questions from anybody in the audience?
Just that it was fantastic to hear Megan speak on this because, and I like kind of this, this combination of the two of us, because from the research side and from the background side, and then from Megan and what she's doing. And I will say I've talked with a lot of financial planners and institutions and organizations, and Megan, you're just doing such fantastic work. I would that initial AFC that you got, I wonder if there's a question for me of how much that helps you, because you have such a broad knowledge of kind of really the background of not just the financial advice, but that counseling aspect, which is so critical. And so, you approach this from really the perspective that from my group would want to see a lot more in the industry, from such a kind of broad, holistic sense of not just, the finances. And the last thing I'll say is, the conscious impact. I mean, that was probably extremely thoughtful, but it's so right on in terms of all the stuff that I talk about. And so even the name of your organization fits right in. So thank you. Much appreciated.
I assume we're going to be working together in the future. If it's all right with you, I feel like, yes, this is a great synergy. So I know this is for an aside.
Well, thank you all for attending today, and thanks to you, Eric and Megan, for doing this. I mean, this has been very, very helpful. I mean, very educational. I always learn so much when we do these, and today was no exception by any means. So thanks again, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care. All right.
Thank you.
Bye bye.